Today I'm announcing a 2-week pause on our phased reopening plan. This means all counties for the next 2 weeks will stay in the current phase that they're in this morning.
Washington Governor Jay Inslee there talking about the big pause, keeping our counties in their current COVID recovery phase, at least until May 17th. So is that a sign of hope this spring? Is the fact that Shama Sawant is talking about rent control again a sure sign she's facing another challenge in her seat for the Seattle City Council? Well, we're discussing those questions and so much more here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. My co-host lives his life on the edge because otherwise you're just taking up room. It's writer, chart maker, thrill seeker, Kevin Schofield of Seattle City Council Insight. Kevin, how are you? I know you just got your second COVID shot recently.
Yeah, a little loopy today, chart making, thrill seeking.
It's all part
maybe more in the chart making side today, a little less on the thrill seeking side.
Okay, all right, you got to balance these things in life. Very true. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. Please support them. Pick up a gift card online if you can. Both their locations are closed right now. Help out other small businesses too. Thanks also to our patrons, hoping to have a few of you join our ranks here if you can on this adventure. We're encouraging $10 a month to become a patron. We'll send you out a Seattle News, Views, and Brews mug. We've got these handy dandy 11 ounces right here. Whatever you can give is surely appreciated here. Our mug shot of the week. Ruby Holland sends this in from South Seattle. Coffee with the Panettone. Thank you so much, Ruby. Cheers to you. Thank you for listening and supporting the show there. Panettone, that's the good stuff right there. Well, if you'd like to join Ruby, please do help us out on Patreon. Thanks always to Converge Media, too, which runs the video version of our podcast on their YouTube channel Wednesday nights at 7. Let's get rolling with right here, right now. All right, so as we approach the middle of May, a ton on the Seattle City Council's agenda this week. We're going to key in on an issue that we discussed last week that's scheduled to come up for a vote, how the city is going to spend new vehicle license fees, these car tab fees coming in starting in July of this year. Some background here. The council approved this VLF last fall. Two sides emerged on how to spend this revenue. One was, let's spread it out over a number of different projects, pedestrian improvements, bike infrastructure, a long list there. The other one was to bond against the $7.2 million in annual revenue, get $100 million from that, and then put 75% of that into bridge maintenance, which has been underfunded for many years, as we've talked about on the show. What the council is likely going to vote on here, Kevin, feels like a bit of a hybrid of these two. I want to break down what the council is talking about with these car tab fees and why, Kevin.
Yeah, so they made a last minute change before they voted out of committee, and this change really kind of stems around the realization that, oh, wait a minute, there may not be $100 million worth of shovel-ready projects right away. So wait a minute, we're going to go, devote all this money to $100 million worth of bonds, and then we'll have a bunch of cash sitting in the bank while we get a bunch of projects ready to go, which may take a couple of years. And so Councilmember Strauss came back with an amendment that was adopted unanimously by the committee that said, okay, come back with a list. As we asked you to do before, SDOT, but make sure you specify like the details of the projects, how much they cost, and when they would be ready for funding. Right.
When that bond issuance would be necessary. Yeah, go ahead.
So what we might be able to do is fund, do the bonding in stages. Right. In the short-term years, have more of the revenues rather than all $7.2 million going to debt service. Yeah. Have more of it available to do all these other projects, maintenance projects that SDOT proposed in this. So you get a little bit of both out of that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's a deal, though. I think there are some projects out there, but they need to work themselves more to completion, I guess, or a more complete idea of what they could be. I think that's the challenge.
There's a bunch of bridge maintenance that needs to happen.
Of course,
some of it could just happen right away. Yeah. Some of it would, take longer. Some of them will require a little bit of design phase first before they're ready to go. Right.
Okay.
And and then there may be opportunities for funding from state and federal sources that they want to pursue potentially before they actually start the project. Right.
Got it.
If there's matching funding, that'd be a great thing too.
Yep.
So the timeline for all these projects, there are some really good questions about that. Right. So Strauss has raised a good point here. Like, let's figure out when we really need the money. You know,
Yeah.
he didn't change the whole 75% goes to bridge maintenance, which is good because there's an enormous backlog of bridge maintenance, and they need to be spending, you know, anywhere from $34 to $100 million a year
Yeah.
just to keep up on annual maintenance.
Right.
And right now they're budgeting this is an extraordinary year, and they're budgeting about $12 million.
Right.
So
Just
they're not
even
even close to
Yeah.
you know, the minimum of what they should be spending.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Let alone deal with the backlog.
Yeah. Final question on this, Kevin. I know in working on the story, you were struck by what came across as, wait for it, some cordial debate on this issue. I wanted to ask, did that actually happen? Did you also happen to see a unicorn at the time? What can you tell us about this?
There were rainbows
all over the place, I bet.
And no, they had a substantive policy debate, which is something that's been, you know, really lacking in City Hall lately. There's been a lot of politics, some of which we'll talk about in a little while on in the show. But no, they had a cordial policy debate. They really kind of looked at what is the best use of this money.
Right.
You know, what are we hearing from different sources, including, you know, transportation advocates,
sure,
neighbors,
a lot of stakeholders involved with this.
SDOT, about what, you know, are different uses, and, you know, went a couple rounds in it, and, you know, every round they went, you know, the proposal got better.
That's always good to hear.
So it's like, whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, can they do that?
Yeah,
wow.
I guess. Yeah.
So you know, all credit to them
out.
for like, you know, I think speaking as a, you know, resident and taxpayer and voter, I'd love to see more of that.
Yeah.
More of that. We'll take that. Yeah.
I'll take substance any day, and cordiality works too. I wanted to talk about another piece here, though, Kevin. The council is also working this week and next on a plan for contract workers, trying to create some new protections for them under city law. So this would impact commercial businesses who hire independent contractors. Excluded from this are attorneys and medical professionals, but definitely included a lot of the gig workers out there that we're talking about. The city wants companies to provide a pre-contract written disclosure with the contractor in English and in the contractor's primary language. So a lot to this here, laying out the terms and conditions of work and payment information too. Kevin, I know the council brought up a few questions about this, but the one that really jumps out at me, this sounds like a regulation-sized pain in the rear for small businesses. Let's talk about what this entails.
Yeah, so you know, the concept behind this is a good one.
Okay.
In that if you're going to hire you know, independent contractors, then you should be able to tell them up front, okay, here's what you're going to get paid. Right? Here's the terms of your contract. Here's what you're going to get paid. Here, you know, other kinds of expenses that can be reimbursed. Here's other charges that may get deducted from that. So think about, you know, an Uber driver, right? And you know, all the pluses and minuses of, you know, what can they tell today what they're going to end up getting paid?
No,
not really.
And a lot of them are getting less than minimum wage right now. So keep going.
And then every time they actually get paid, there should be transparency there in terms of here's what you're getting paid.
Yeah.
Here's where it came from. Here's any, you know, additional expenses that were added. Here's the fees that were pulled out of it.
Yeah.
So you can do all the math and make sure that you got paid fairly. And then there's some requirements in here around timely payment and, you know, making sure that it doesn't take too long to get the money out to folks. But, you know, the question the council raised, and you mentioned a moment ago, was questions around, you know, what does this mean for, you know, really, really small businesses, somebody that's, you know, like me, a sole proprietor, like I got no other employees, it's just me, right? And if I bring in even, and, you know, there's issues, a whole dimension around like, what if it's really short-term work? What if I bring in like an IT consultant to come in and just like
for a couple hours,
you know, a couple hours to do some stuff in my, you know, in my office here to, you know, fix my internet access or, you know, wire up some different stuff.
Sure.
Do I have to do all this for that person? Technically, the way it's written right now, yes, right? I would need, before I could bring in a guy to do a couple hours of work, I'd have to give them, according to a form that will be produced by the Office of Labor Standards, in up to 2 different languages, this whole pre-contract transparency, you know, disclosure. And then when I pay them, I have to do kind of the whole thing too. But, you know, it also, you know, raises, you know, on top of that, all sorts of other issues about just simply like how much work is it to do?
Yeah, right. Yeah, how much work is it to get that work coming in? And you brought up the Office of Labor Standards, which I think is a very important part of this too. The way this is written right now, it would go into effect March 1st of next year. But I know OLS is saying, wait a minute, we got a lot on our plate here. We need at least a year to ramp this up, get these things written in different languages, et cetera.
Yeah.
And that really is a department that has its hands very much full already.
Very much. And, as the council keeps passing additional labor regulations, many of which, have, very real substantive value to them, they're not adding budget to Office of Labor Standards. So once a year in the fall budget process, they say, should we add a few more people here and there? But they're, as they think about these individual additional regulatory additions they want to add, they're not at the time thinking about how much more work is this for the enforcement organization around it.
Yeah, and you brought up a point too. Does the city of Seattle exclude itself? I know that's the way it's kind of written now.
That's a huge question, right?
Really interesting part of this.
I can tell you, I look at a lot of contracts that the city of Seattle, including and especially the city council produces, because they, contract with consultants and UW research groups and things like this all the time to do
full disclosure. I'm one. Like go ahead.
They almost always get the contractor working before the contract is done. Right. So, the city of Seattle is absolutely guilty of the violations that they want to crack down on companies for doing. But they exclude themselves from this. And that also raises an even larger question. It's like, well, okay, if you're going to do all this and it's required to sort of put this all on paper and what there were legal consequences for not following through.
Why not just make it a contract,
on what this, pre-contract disclosure says. What's the difference between that and a contract?
Yeah.
I mean, it is essentially a contract at that point.
So,
what's the difference there? Why would you do one of these and then a contract? And
there's a ton going on here. Now, I wanted to throw in one last piece here, Kevin, in terms of looking ahead, a big lift potentially for the council here, talking specifically about platform gig workers like Uber and Lyft drivers, making sure they get a minimum wage with another piece of legislation later on this summer. Councilmember Herbold wants it to go through her committee, but I know some other council members out there saying, pump the brakes. We're working on this written disclosure issue here. That's going to be a big lift ahead. She's saying maybe by summertime, but I don't know if the full council's on board with that idea.
Right. So in this transparency legislation, they've got a whole paragraph that says, council is announcing its intent to look at the gig workers, minimum compensation regulations for gig workers, including Uber and Lyft and the like. And it says that they'd like to do this in July and August. Now, normally this would go through Councilmember Mosqueda's committee, which is the one that handles labor issues, but they're booked up for the summer because they're going to be dealing with all the ARPA
federal
funding
funds
stuff
coming in,
and pre-work on the fall budget and all that. So they're going to be super busy. So Councilmember Herbold has said, well, we can just put it through my committee. And it was funny because at the committee meeting last week when this came up, Council President Gonzalez chimed in and said, Councilmember Herbold, I just want to point out that your committee is pretty booked up this summer too, because you've got public safety and human services. And there's a lot of
police contract floating around out there. You bet. Yeah.
This just seems a little ambitious to get this done, by the end of the summer.
Yeah, we'll see. I know Lisa Herbold's a hard worker, but there's a lot on the line here for sure. So keep an eye out for this written disclosure issue to be in the Finance and Housing Committee on May 18th. A lot still ahead with this one. Let's move on to Now Hear This. Well, Councilmember Shama Sawant is back at it with a plan for rent control, which is prohibited under state law. In case you just woke up under a rock this morning, our legislators in Olympia did a lot this past session, but they did not touch this issue. Councilmember Sawant is saying rents are up 9% in the first 3 months of this year, and rent control is the answer to keep that down. So here's what she said last week at a press conference.
Dramatic steps are needed to fight the growing crisis of economic displacement and gentrification, which is being fueled entirely by profiteering corporate landlords, the big banks that underwrite real estate deals, and big corporations. That's why I'm proud today to stand alongside our renters' rights movement to announce major new legislation that demands housing as a human right and our strategy to win them.
And cue the cheers right there. So, Kevin, the legislature Councilmember Sawant is proposing is almost identical to what she presented in 2019 when she was up for re-election. And I will say she's potentially up against a recall campaign here in 2021. I want to put that aside for 1 second here as we start talking about some of the details. You graphed this out. You're a grapher. What can I tell you? You do a great job at this. In Seattle City Council Insight, rents did indeed rise at the start of this year, but that's not the whole picture, is it?
Yeah, no. Councilmember Sawant cherry picked, a particular 3-month period to make a point. Rents have increased 9% since January, but they decreased 22% in the 10 months prior to that.
Yes.
Right. So you put that all together, and from March of last year through March of this year, altogether rents are still 14.5% below where they were pre-pandemic. Right? And then if you go back even further, using
this
the
was fascinating to me.
that Sawant pulled her data from all the way back to the beginning of 2017, you see 2017, 18, 19 rents, other than a little bit of seasonal variation because they always dip a little bit in the winter and come up a little bit in the summer. They were flat for 3 years. And then they tanked when we hit the pandemic. But what happened over those 3 years? What happened over those 3 years is suddenly a whole bunch of housing at every price point came online. A bunch of public housing, a bunch of permanently affordable housing, some permanent supportive housing, and market rate housing and luxury housing. At every price point, it all came online. And that really feeds into the main argument of the critics of rent control. Which is that
the answer is more housing, right?
Rent control, it's been proven over and over again, tends to push down the amount of new housing that's created, right? And just essentially makes it more expensive, right? The best thing you can do to control housing prices is build a lot of housing at every price point, right? And that's what we did, and it worked.
And the other question I thought was interesting when it comes to the math here. We hear about this rise in rents at the start of this year. Is it going to rise for the rest of the year, as Councilmember Sawant is talking about here? We're talking about a relatively, I guess you could call it a large jump over the course of those 3 months here, although on perspective. Is it going to rise as high as 40% by the end of the year, as she's talking about?
Right. Yeah. She said annualized at 9% is a 40% increase. But you play that out, you look at employment, you look at, consumer spending, you look at every other metric that we're using to track what's going on in this pandemic and recovery. And, it's V-shaped. There's a huge drop off. In the beginning months of the recovery, there's been, a huge rapid recovery for those. And then all of them start to trail off. Right. So the notion that, rent prices are going to continue to increase at the rate they've been increasing over the last few months is just ridiculous. I mean, it's just not going to happen. Right. And rent prices, like everything else, are very much determined by what people are able to pay.
It's the market.
Right? And there's no evidence that there is a market for rent prices that is, at a 40% annualized rate above what people were paying in January.
Right. And I will say also, Councilmember Sawant is talking about some other bills she's promising soon. So rent control on commercial properties, which is actually not prohibited under state law. She's also talking about an ordinance requiring landlords to give tenants 180 days notice for a rent increase. Also an ordinance requiring landlords to pay for tenant relocation expenses if a rent increase forces a tenant to move. Just a flurry of bills here, Kevin, we're talking about. Is it enough to direct attention away or put the pressure off her, I guess, as she faces the possibility of a recall campaign, which is gathering signatures right now?
That was, consideration in a different way 2 years ago when she was facing a really tough re-election battle, right? And then she rolled this out like 6 weeks before, in late September, 6 weeks before election day, she rolled this out as like, hey, look at, this bright, shiny object, right? And now she's facing she's facing a recall election, and she trots it out again. And 2 years ago, she didn't do anything with it, right? It never went anywhere.
Well, because this is tied to, this goes into effect when the state prohibition drops, right? I mean, that's the big telling piece of this for me.
Right. Yeah. And looking at some of these other things that she's saying, you're going to do. I mean, you put a couple of these together, right? If you put together, rent control, saying there's a cap on how much you can raise rent every year, and 180 notice on rent increases, those are a pretty toxic combination, right? Because already what people see happens with rent control is if you put a cap on rent control, landlords raise rents the absolute maximum every year, because they know that if they ever don't, and their costs, like construction costs, because landlord's costs track much more closely with construction costs than
Yeah.
consumer inflation, which
Yeah.
is what Swan wants to sort of track,
tie it to,
the cap with,
Mhm.
then they'll never catch up.
Right.
So they have to do the max. So what will happen if they put these together is 180 days before every lease ends.
Yeah.
There will be a notice that they're going to increase it the full amount.
Right.
Because, A, they have to, because they'll never catch up.
Yeah.
And B, 6 months later, they don't know what the conditions are going to be.
Right.
No one's going
Right.
to complain if they don't increase it the maximum amount.
Right.
But so they will notice if they're going to increase it the maximum amount.
Whew. That's something that we're going to be tracking, I know, over the next couple of weeks here when you see these different pieces from Councilmember Swan. But
And
I wanted to follow. Please go ahead,
I
Kevin.
was going to say just one last point of this. This is again one of the critiques of rent control is that in and of itself it disincents all the things that you want to do. And so what happens to deal with that and to deal with people trying to work their way around it is you build up this whole portfolio of other regulations on top of it to try to mitigate the worst aspects of rent control.
Wow.
And it's just it just turns out to be a huge mess.
One piling up on top of the other. Thank you for that observation there. I wanted to follow up, though, on a story we discussed last week, the shelter surge the city council is talking about to deal with homelessness here. Councilmember Lewis's Committee on Homelessness met to discuss this past week a lot of different things. 3 hours later after that meeting, I'm not sure I'm any more well informed about what's going on, but I want to try to dive in with you here, Kevin. There was a lot of consternation about the Street Sinks program, simplified running water systems to help people living on the street. This was approved by the council last fall. Are we going to see these happen, Kevin? A lot of discussion about this.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to happen. So this was a thing where originally, out of a $1.5 billion budget that the city council approved last fall, they put in $50,000 originally for a street sinks program, as a way to get more hand washing facilities and more running water available to our homeless population in the city, which is good. That'll definitely improve public health in a lot of ways of doing that. And they modeled it after sort of private charitable program that creates these cheap
street
not
sinks,
in the sense of bad, but cheap and inexpensive setups with a couple buckets and something
drains into a little garden thing.
Drains in the garden thing, all on private property.
Right.
And they said, oh yeah, we could quickly do the math for how much one of those costs. We could do 100 of those, 120, something like that, with $100,000. So the city council upped it to $100,000.
Yes, right.
And turns out when the city tries to do this, it's a lot slower and it's a lot, and it's a lot harder to do because, the city has to follow the Seattle Plumbing Code. They have to follow ADA regulations, all these other things where, private organizations and, stores, you just want to sort of set up one of these stations out in front, don't necessarily have to do all that. So it's taken a long time. It's turned out to be more expensive to do this, to make them durable, to make them, sanitary, all those things. And city councils got pretty frustrated.
Right. I wanted to point out too, though, on the shelter space piece here, I know Councilmember Lewis last week was very bullish on the idea of, hey, knock on wood, we might hear about that third hotel coming online. That did not happen this past week, and I just wanted to talk about this. I think the lesson learned here is that things definitely take time, Kevin, but in terms of these signings and contracts here, are you confident that we will see a third hotel come online for the city of Seattle this year? What do you think?
I haven't heard any, backroom buzz about what's holding it up. I've definitely heard that there's a lot of folks working on it. So I assume that they're going to continue to work on it. How long it would take to do that? I think my best guess would be we will see it sometime this year. I don't know when. This is now, the most effective practice we have for creating, temporary shelter for homeless people to stabilize them, where they get a room and their own bathroom.
Yep.
And that's a huge improvement, right? Tiny home villages where they got their own lockable room, but they have, shared bathroom facilities, isn't quite as public health sanitary as like a hotel room. So this is better. In that sense. And it's proven to be pretty effective in stabilizing people. So it's expensive. It's
Yeah.
expensive to do this, right?
Yeah.
So these have really become the two big focuses this year: is get
Yeah.
more tiny home villages built,
Right.
and try to expand the hoteling, right? To
Yeah.
the extent that there's money available.
And it looks like there are 3 tiny home villages that could be coming online this summer. I saw possibly, it looks like one in the U District, North Seattle, and the Inner Bay area, but
Yep.
ramping up those is going a little more quickly than the hotel option, I guess.
Yeah, they have, there's a combination of things that happen. Some of the same issues with street sinks have to
Yeah.
happen there, right? They have to
Right.
figure out what they're doing about running water and drainage. They have to figure out what they're doing about putting in electricity. There's a bunch of issues, and then
Connect
just,
the service providers to them
permits
to make it happen. Yeah.
and yeah, get the case management and service providers, and fencing around the property,
Right.
and then just get the houses in there and built, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a bunch, but I think everybody's impatient. I think everybody wants
Yeah.
us to go faster.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are, there's a lot of finger pointing, when
As to
people get
why it's
frustrated
going
with
more
this.
slowly. Yeah. 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 Well, tell you what, let's move on. I was going to point the finger. You shouldn't be doing that, right? Shouldn't do that at all, but I almost did. We're going to move on to our final segment here. What's next? Kevin, I wasn't pointing at you to tell you it's always your fault. I really wasn't.
That's okay.
bad
It's your
bad
fault.
habit of mine. Well, it's time to take a pause. Okay, enough of that. Let's talk about the real pause everyone's concerned about, pausing the COVID phases in our state for 2 weeks here. This announcement from the governor came as a surprise to a lot of people, me certainly. The numbers have not looked good in terms of virus transmission and hospitalizations, but those figures appear to have hit a plateau here. Kevin, I think this seemed like to me at least, a call to action from the governor to get more people vaccinated. We're just not there yet.
Well, I mean, he's had nothing but calls to action for the last several weeks.
Right, that's true.
And
Yeah.
the reality on the ground was, based upon the rules that he had in place before,
Right.
he paused this.
Mhm.
King County and probably a couple other counties were going to roll back from phase 3 to phase 2.
Yeah.
That's what the number said. The number said they needed to do that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, let's just say what this really is, right?
Mhm.
This Governor Inslee did not want to roll King County, which is almost a third of the population of the state, back from phase 3 to phase 2. That would have been super politically unpopular.
They're the people that voted him into office.
And so, based upon some early signs that our fourth wave might be peaking, he said, "Okay, I'm going to pause it for 2 weeks."
Right.
And if we get a lot more people vaccinated and fully vaccinated, and maybe we do a little better job on really our due diligence on wearing PPE and masks and social distancing, maybe we'll get to go down a little bit further.
Right.
Will it be below the numbers? That's what he's hoping. He's hoping you can have some good news a couple weeks from now and say, look, we turned the corner on it. Will it happen? I think it's hard to say.
I think so too. And I'm wondering, Kevin, if Washington State tries to follow the lead of New York, for example. It set a reopening date there. It almost seems that a state like that, California too, working on this, those states are saying we may not have herd immunity, but we're just going to manage the effects of COVID as best we can because everybody's so tired of dealing with this. How do you see those other states opening where Washington State has been so tentative on this?
It's different. And I think the public health officials all the way up to the CDC have had difficulty in identifying what are the measures that really make a difference. Right? Why has California's COVID numbers plummeted where Oregon's and Washington's have not? Like, what's the difference? We're all basically doing the same stuff. And the public health folks can't actually tell us. Right? It's still kind of a mystery for a bunch of these things, right? So is the right solution in one state the right solution for another? Maybe not. I mean, for many of the stuff, should we be wearing masks still? Absolutely. Should we be doing social distancing? But the rest of it, it's a little hard to say how much travel is going on, how much tourism is going on.
We're going to see more of that this summer for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's a point to ponder in the weeks ahead, and we'll see what happens around May 17th. But everybody, get vaccinated, would you? Call 833. Call 833 Vax Help.
Get vaccinated. We have to get out of this together. Right.
Yeah. Right. You can even set it up. The state will hook you up with an Uber ride to an appointment. So it can be done. That's
there's so many ways to do this. And I'll tell you, I got my second vaccination dose late last week. I got it at Kaiser Permanente.
Cool.
Kaiser Permanente is now doing walk-in without an appointment.
That's right.
Even if you're not a Kaiser Permanente member.
Fire it up.
Right?
Yeah.
For anybody. So like if you are for some reason having trouble finding, and I went down to Renton to do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
that's where I went
if
to.
you're not
Yeah.
in the city's got a bunch of walk-in appointments available.
Yep.
The county's got some available, but there are other resources now where you can just walk in and get it. Please
It can be done.
just get vaccinated.
It can be done. It can be done.
That's the surest path for us out of this.
Agreed. Well, we like to wrap up our show with talking about some of the tasty things to have on your coffee break. And Kevin, once again, you have inspired my children to bake for me, and I'm definitely not complaining here. You will recall a few weeks ago, folks, Kevin talked about using leftover sourdough starter to make crackers. What do you do with all that stuff as it keeps growing? It's a great idea. But Kevin, I think my daughter has tried to one-up you here. Check out, if you will, the sourdough chocolate chip cookie. Look at that guy coming at you, right?
Was that using the recipe I sent you guys?
For a sourdough chocolate chip cookie, I don't know if she used that one. She might have found something online, but it's one of those things where it's a lot doughier, I guess. It's not your
traditional. It's a little doughier, but it's so yummy. It's totally yummy because it balances out the sweetness. Like, normally chocolate cookies have got, all that sugar and all that brown sugar, and the sourdough really just balances it out super well. And just adds kind of a whole other level of complexity. I love it. I love sourdough chocolate chip cookies.
Awesome.
It sounds weird, but it's just totally
But
awesome.
it really is tasty. That is a mouthful right there. And I wanted to say from me to you, Kevin, thank you for keeping life sour.
Now, maybe in return, you can convince my kids to start baking for me.
Oh boy, see what I can do. I got my hands full. I'm just going to say that right now with the two that I have, but good luck with that, sir. And thank you so much for being on the program as always. Thanks also to our patrons who support us on Patreon. Please do support us at any level if you can. We really do appreciate you powering our show. Thanks to everybody for listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews. You can always find out what's brewing here in local politics. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen. Again, please do become a patron on Patreon if you like what you're hearing. We really could use your support. Finally, thanks to Converge Media. Thanks for airing our show, and thanks for watching there, too. We'll see you there next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2021.